Good evening and welcome to this
strategy for all of the vehicles, and that was ostensibly based around the central government's 2040 roadmap for introducing a ban on the sale of IC vehicles in the car and small van category. You'll also be aware, obviously, that that's now been brought forward to 2030, which substantially changes the way that we need to move forward with our fleet procurement. So members have a number of things to consider, and just moving down the report a little bit just to cover those off. And this is not an exhaustive list, but we have to decide at what stage the council wants to phase in the purchase of ULEV vehicles, because it will be possible to replace the vast majority of our small vehicle fleet, which could be powered by ULEV vehicles, in 2026-27. But what that would mean is that the lifespan of those vehicles would basically piggyback over the 2030 legislation. So we would need to look at what that means in terms of contracts and conditions for staff. A lot of our smaller vehicle fleet is utilised by the housing employees, and they currently have the ability within their contracts to take vehicles home. So we would have to do some negotiations around whether that still continues. If it does continue, who pays for the electric and how we do that? Who pays for the installation of chargers? Does everybody have a drive that chargers can be put on, etc.? Which vehicles will come into scope? So it isn't just when we talk about ULEV, it's not just electrification. There are a number of other alternatives, particularly for the larger vehicles. If we are going to then look forward from the National Waste Strategy, which could potentially bring more larger vehicles into the operation, and for argument's sake end up with bringing all of the housing vehicles back to a depot to charge them, then is the current depot big enough? Obviously, there's going to be a mandate from the government to collect different waste streams, so we're expecting the fleet to expand. We also have to deal with Western Power because there is a thing called the electrical headroom for the depot, which is the difference between the available power and the power that we currently use. But there's also a headroom for the entire industrial estate. And dealing with Western Power at the moment, just to give you a feel, power companies are given what's almost an agency by the government, and Western Powers has got 3 years to run. So they're very reticent to start putting a lot of extra expense into provision at this moment in time. Another thing that we didn't know either is that if you build yourself a factory, you can tell Western Power how much power you require and they will give it to you. If you only use half that, they can't take it back until you say that's okay. So there's got to be an awful lot of negotiations around the entire supply to the industrial estate. Also, how will this all be financed? Obviously, that we have our own replacement programme, there's government funding, there's competitive grants coming in, so we need to be ready for when this needs to roll out. So there are a lot of things to decide on, and some things are out of our control, as I've just said with the electrification. But we have had, and members will probably have seen, that we've had a couple of reports done by outside consultants on the electrification of vehicles and the infrastructure to support that. And what that has thrown up is that we can actually start with quite a small scale trial. We have identified some vehicles that would make the potential for making good test vehicles. We already have one charger that charges 2 vehicles online at Castle House. The vehicles that we're looking at using as a trial can be operated from Castle House. So that will give us a good idea how the vehicles will operate in these operations as far as a district-wide service concerned. Because it's quite easy to look at somewhere like Nottingham City, where the vehicles do 2 and 3 miles, across the city, whereas from the depot to Walton and back, bordering on 60 miles, which is at the moment the entire lifespan of the battery for a day. So there are a lot of things that we need to decide, and to allow us to do that, what we're asking members to do is to support us in putting together a working party, which will comprise of myself as fleet, the operational side, it will asset management, consultants, both in infrastructure and vehicles, Western Power, etc., to get us a route map, because 2026 will soon be here, and we need to get ready so that when we're ready to roll out, that we've got business cases ready to go for any grants that may be available. We're also asking members to support that phased approach rather than throwing all our eggs in one basket, because you'll be aware that there is more than one option. And also to support the increase in capital expenditure for 2 of the test vehicles, because the vehicles that are identified have been identified as IC vehicles, internal combustion, and the price of the vehicles to replace that with ULEV are a lot more expensive. And just to let members have a feel, I'm trying to look now, in 2.8, it gives you an idea of the differences in price. So when you look at a small van, £12,000 for a straight replacement for what we've got now, 29 if you want to do it with electric. Going up to a refuse freighter, £180,000 we spend at the moment. Nottingham City have just bought 2 electrics, £500,000 apiece. So there is a huge difference in the capital outlay. Now, obviously, there's a total cost of ownership to look at here, and there are an awful lot of things to take into account. But obviously, the savings in fuel and oil are just one of them. And to give you an idea, in 3.2, we spent just shy of £475,000 a year on petrol, diesel, well, not petrol and diesel, but diesel, oil and lubricants. So there's a big chunk of money to go out there in savings as well. So we need to put this working party together with your support and get a firm action plan for basically what is going to be the next 10, 15 years and then further afield after that. So rather than read any more of this out, I'll take questions and I'll answer them if I can.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thanks a lot. Good presentation. Excellent presentation, in fact. And on behalf of myself, I can't speak for the committee at this point. You'd certainly have my full support in this proposition because it's the right thing to do. And that is in the context of how we set about our climate change strategy and response, that it was a realistic deadline and realistically put into that sort of context of cost versus loss, if I put it that bluntly. You rightly point out there £500,000 per electric vehicle. I'm only quickly doing my maths, Andy, on how many vehicles we've got, and I think I'd be at 8 million, and that's without the infrastructure, the extra space, or even contemplating if people have to take a waste vehicle home to charge it through the kitchen window. There's an awful lot of complexity to this that is, again, you rightly say, looking at some of the smaller cities, that, good for them, that they're going ahead on this, but their waste routes are much shorter. I think people need to realise that obviously the vehicles, in terms of the tipping of the bins and the crushing, that will be using the electricity as well. So there are real implications to this, that we might end up with smaller routes, needing more staff, needing more vehicles. And certainly from my own perspective, what I'd be loath to do is to spend that money up front to get a headline, ahead of the government deciding what the waste strategy is, which could totally change what we collect and what frequencies and how. We might introduce food waste, we might need different vehicles in order to do that with different frequencies. And again, into that context, we are less than 1% of the carbon emissions of the district, just less than 2% if we include our housing stock. And we've put into the capital strategy the monies to go further on energy efficiency, on looking at the energy use in our leisure centres and others. So we are targeting our areas of high carbon impact. We're also doing a huge amount of tree planting as best we can towards mitigation. That should kick in 3 to 4 years' time as they grow and start sequestering that carbon. So we have that sensible strategy. And what you've brought forward, Mr. Kirk, totally mirrors that it is sensible to understand the art of the possible. And I think we all know that in a few years' time, probably these vehicles and the kit that goes with them will be more cost effective, because there'll be a greater purchasing power and procurement, not least through the public sector, but also the private sector, because it's such a keen issue with the public. So very bluntly, why waste the public's money now on a headline when we can invest effectively going forward? And the contrast was there. You showed the savings on fuel, oil, etc. Annual savings wouldn't even equate to one waste vehicle acquisition. So similarly, if we're being environmental, we should be looking at replacement of vehicles as they near end of life or end of lease, not just scrapping them now because it's unnecessary. But the report proves our intent to this agenda. It proves that we're being thoughtful, and it proves that we're looking for value for money whilst best achieving that carbon reduction when it is most propitious to do so. So I'm very grateful, Andy, and I will propose the recommendations and go to Councillor Jackson. You're on mute, Roger. Roger?
Okay, sorry, I apologise. Thank you, David. No, thank you for what you just said. I mean, I've heard this report before. It's a great report from Andy, and we do need a phased approach, because I think technology is going to change going forward as we go on, because the costs, and it's proved, and the problems arise from trying to convert to fully electric vehicles. It is damn near impossible as it is at the moment. I personally think that larger vehicles will go down the hydrogen cell route and not be electric, because I think the technology is moving fast on that, and larger vehicles can cope with the hydrogen cell better than smaller cars and vans. And I think that's why I think we need the phase, because as we go forward and more demand comes forward, that the technology with demand, things will come onto the marketplace that we can have and use. I'm not a great believer in all battery power, because I think now we're actually mining the seabed for cadmium, is it, which has its own other environmental issues as well, because the sea used to be one of our best carbon sinks, and we're destroying all the seagrass. I think there's an algae in the sea which used to take about 40% of our carbon out of the atmosphere, which is slowly disappearing. You know, and I think other things need to be thinking of how we absorb carbon out of the atmosphere, so to just stop actually producing it. I think there's a lot more to come out on this thing. I'm a great believer, as you know, on reducing carbon. I know the climate and with the climate change, and we have to be seen to do something. Obviously, it's great what we're doing, but we do need to have a phased approach, because the cost is going to be horrific. And I think the new technology is going to come forward instead of going straight, gun-ho for something where it could be cheaper or slightly different in a few years' time. I think we need to be looking at, and I think having the working parties look at all the possibilities is a great idea, because, you know, as I say, we have to do something, and I'm really pleased we are being seen to do something, but I just don't want to go straight down the electric battery route, because I think other technology will come on board very soon.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Roger. And I think members have grasped fairly well that the technology on cars and small vehicles, as far as electric goes, is pretty well proven. It works. It does what it says on the tin. We just need to be satisfied that it will work in a business sense for our district, for the size of it. But quite rightly, the larger vehicles, there are other technologies around, hydrogen cell, one of them. It's still unproven. The electric vehicles at Nottingham City, although out there working, have had issues. And I think if we can bide our time carrying out our own trials, by the time we get to the end of the smaller trials, we'll know more and have a better idea for how the larger stuff is going. So, yeah, pleased that members have grasped that.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Andy. Councillor Girling.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Yeah, I think the difference in cost is quite eye-watering when you look at particularly the bigger vehicles, and the estimated grant to compensate for that is woefully low. So I think that the approach of going the way you're suggesting, Andy, is absolutely the right way to do, and I fully support the fact of having a working party to look at the best options so that we can move forward in a sensible way. As you say, I think technology is going to change as we go towards this, and so there might be some better options come forward on that, definitely. So I fully support this, Chairman.
Thanks, Keith. All right, I can't see any more hands, physical or virtual. Just checking. Councillor Wendels.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I sort of fully support what Andy's suggesting and the comments that have been made by members of the committee as well. I think it's an excellent outline roadmap that's been put forward. The next stage really will be for the working group to be formed and to put the meat on the bone, put the detail there and put a more detailed roadmap together, which is what we need, because we do want to move towards the ultra low electric vehicles as much as is feasible. It's all part of our strategy, and I certainly support that. But I think what this report does really is takes us a big step forward in the right direction, to put in that roadmap and that meat on the bone. So I sort of fully support what's being suggested in the recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. Right, okay. So I proposed the item. It was seconded by Councillor Jackson. Are any members of the committee against the recommendations as they appear at section 8 on page 15? No? Excellent. Then that is unanimous. Andy, thank you very much. Mr. Kirk, sorry. Right. Slight intermission. I now need to refer to Mr. Hill.
Yeah, apologies, Chairman. Just aware that the first couple of minutes of the live stream had no sounding. So just for the purpose of the live stream and members of the public watching, just to recap through items 1 to 6. So we've got all members present, no apologies for absence. Councillor Wendell's declared a personal interest in relation to item 19 as a Southwell Leisure Centre trustee. There were no declarations of intention to record the meeting other than our own recording. The minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of February were agreed as a correct record. There was no chairman's report given, and the floor plan of policy items was noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Moving back to substantive agenda decisions to be taken. So we're on to agenda item 8, that being Safer Streets 2. And I think this is going to be presented by Mr. Batty.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a report for committee to consider a Safer Streets 2 project in Newark. Members will be aware that Newark was selected last year to take part in the Home Office bidding for Safer Streets 1 based on crime data that identified 2 lower super output areas within the Newark area. That was a successful bid. We were awarded a substantial amount of money that has now been spent within the Newark area. That came to a close yesterday with all the schemes being delivered, and those schemes are set out in 2.2 of the report. If I may, Chairman, since writing this report, we've done a survey of the areas and we've had some really positive feedback from the residents. 83% feel safer than they did from the beginning of the work. 53% have reported that the area appears cleaner. 40% feel safer after dark, and 44% feel that the community looks after each other a lot better than they did before the work was started. So some really positive feedback on the work that's taken place there. And I think it's based on that and on the feedback we've had throughout the project that we're proposing that we look at a Safer Streets 2 project. We've used the same analysis as we did to identify the original areas, or the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner have done the analysis for us, and we've identified 3 lower super output areas again in the Newark area that score the highest on the crime data that's been used, and those areas are set out in the appendix to the report and at 3.1. In broad terms, they are the sort of Millgate area, the Barnby Road area, and the sort of Burbage Road area. Building on the momentum of the stage 1 bid, what we're looking at is a Safer Streets 2 area within the 3 areas that I've outlined, Chairman, but with a reduced level of intervention, because clearly we haven't got the same level of funding that we had for the Safer Streets 1 area. So in 3.2, I've set out the broad outlines of the project and the themes that we'll be looking at. These have been discussed amongst the 3 partners, ourselves, the police, and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and these are sort of based on the analysis, but also with a local flavour. So, for example, vehicle crime is something that myself and Heather Sutton have identified as an issue around the Newark area, along with bike security, which did feature in Safer Streets 1 as well. And we've also kept environmental improvements in there, because as I've just said from the survey, there's actually been a good feedback in terms of the area feeling cleaner and appearing cleaner. And there's always that link between, if you step out your door and the area feels clean, it looks clean, you tend more to feel safer and to take more pride in that area. So we feel that environmental improvements are important. In 3.4, there's a breakdown of the sort of the draft budget plan, and then the outline of where the funding's coming from for the scheme. And you'll see that what the scheme amounts to is a close to £110,000 investment in those 3 low super output areas. Our finance colleagues have identified the funding that we have potentially available to put into the project, and that's outlined in the financial implications at 5.1. I think that's all I need to say, Chairman, but I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Alan. And certainly congratulations on Safer Streets 1, as we now call it. Now it has a successor. That's excellent feedback. Right, so I'll propose the recommendations purely so they can now be debated. And the first hand up was Councillor Wendell.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to second the recommendations and to thank Alan and his colleagues actually for all the hard work that's gone into, well, first of all, Safer Streets 1, which has been a real success. So thanks to everyone who's worked really hard on that. I think it's a great idea to move forward with Safer Streets 2. Whilst obviously we can't work to quite the same level, magnitude of Safer Streets 1 without the Home Office funding. I think it's great that we can work with our partners to put together, what seems some excellent proposals. And just looking at what's listed down there at paragraph 3.4 in the report, for our 1/3 share of the cost of that, we're getting an awful lot leveraged in with the finance that the partners are putting in to that as well. So I think we're getting excellent value for money and support the recommendation.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Peacock.
So yeah, sorry, Chair, I was just moving rooms. Yeah, I'm happy with the recommendation. I think Safe Streets initiative is a big success and will continue to be a big success, and I'm sure Safe Streets 2 will be a big success. What I'd like to ask Alan is his thoughts on how we deal with crime out of Newark. Obviously, clearly the statistics are high in Newark, and I understand that. I understand the need for more policing, different policing, and information collecting. But I'd like to ask Alan if at some point in the future we'll be looking at more rural areas, rural crime, and drilling down the reasons why there seems to there's a perception that there's an increase in rural crime, and whether something a similar scheme could be run in those areas where we do get those opportunistic crimes and crimes against farms and etc. etc.
Just before you answer that, Alan, can I add on to the question? Because thanks for that, Paul. It's not too dissimilar to something I was going to ask. So up front, one of these areas is in my ward. Hooray! Indeed, Councillor Gilling lives in it. So I'm delighted to see that. But already in my mind, I'm thinking of other parts of the ward that I know in particular at the moment have vehicle crime. And it was good to hear, Alan, you saying that the environmental improvements have had a big change. Because I think all collectively, all right, cleaner, safer, greener is seen as a brand, and some people tease it, but we don't actually see them as separable. If you have pride in your environment and it's tidier, it should just confirm things. So Safer Streets is an initiative, not of our own, from elsewhere, with funding that follows it. Is the government and or the Police and Crime Commissioner looking for learning from it? And if they are, and even if they're not, what are we learning from it, to get back to Paul's point, that even in the absence of further funding, we might be able to do things ourselves directly with a local constabulary, or just tailoring how we deliver some of our services?
Okay, thank you. I'll take that last question first, if I may, and then come on to the more sort of rural crime issue. In terms of learning, halfway through the year, we had a meeting with the Home Office to talk through how we were progressing. They wanted to sort of do a mini audit of where we were. And even at that stage, Newark was being seen as a real exemplar project because of the joint working, because of the work we'd done. And now we've come to the end of it. The representative from the Police and Crime Commissioner's office is already got a planned discussion with the Home Office, and Matt Finch is taking part in that, to talk through what we've learned, what could be done better, certainly what we could share with other bids that are going into Safer Streets 2, because there is a Safer Streets 2 Home Office funding stream, which some of the other authorities in Nottinghamshire are bidding into this time. So yeah, I think certainly Newark's been seen as a real success and a real exemplar in terms of what's been delivered in what has been, really difficult circumstances, because the announcement of the bid was delayed until July, so we really didn't get going until July, and then we've had 2 lockdowns in that period. It has been a real challenge, but as you've seen, we've delivered an awful lot in that time. So there's an awful lot of learning that's been seen nationally, but locally, we've learned what works well, what doesn't, what sort of target hardening, burglary reduction type schemes residents are willing to accept. We started off with quite a broad range of options available to them, but as we went through the project and as we engaged with people who had suffered burglary, it became obvious that actually what you need to offer is a fairly narrow options, because most people want the same thing, whether it be better locks on the door, more home CCTV options. So there has been quite a lot of learning that we've got from that process, and I think equally, to pick up Councillor Peacock's point, there's been a lot of learning as to what we can take out of the Safer Streets area into other parts of the district. I now meet weekly with Heather Sutton to talk through what we're doing on COVID issues, but more broadly, local policing, where the hotspots of crime are, where hotspots of ASB are, and we plan our work together to make sure that we're aware of what the concerns are, whether it be ASB, whether it be just high levels of crime, and then talk about how they can be policed better as a partnership. Specifically on rural crime, as part of the Community Safety Partnership, one of the priorities for Newark and Bassetlaw is rural crime, and there is a rural crime subgroup that Chief Inspector Rogers chairs. So some of those rural crimes are being picked up. It hasn't been particularly effective, or not ineffective, but it hasn't met a lot recently because of all the COVID issues. But yeah, it is something going forward that we certainly want to be a part of, and to make sure that the more rural areas of Newark and Sherwood are managed and identified through that group.
Thanks, Alan. Paul, did I see you put your hand back up?
No, it was an affliction.
Talking of which, Councillor Girling.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Firstly, well done on the Safer Streets one and what you've achieved there. I think it's been outstanding. I must say, when I was reading this report though, and I saw the 3 places named, Millgate, Barnbygate and Bowbridge Road, there wasn't names that would immediately jump out at me as being high crime spot areas. But then when you go further into the report and look at the size of the maps, you then understand possibly why that it's been gone to fit into that. And just to refute what the chairman said about me living in the Barnby Road area, I do, but that's not why it's become a high crime area. Get that straight from now on. And I just wonder though, it is the criteria that they've picked for this, Andy. I think it'd have been really helpful if within the maps we'd have had the red dots. When things are reported and there's a crime number and crime, a red dot goes on a map, doesn't it? And that's how you then select why you pick the area you pick. I think it'd have been interesting to see where within that Millgate map area, for example, the concentration of red dots would be. The same with Barnbygate, because I do know in some of that area around there, particularly around Cross Street, there has been some drugs raids, for example, and things like that. So I know there are things go on in and around that area, but I think for us to understand it better, it might be helpful if that sort of thing, more of a visual aid to us, if that makes sense. But I fully support the recommendations, Chairman, on this report.
Thank you, Keith. Councillor White.
thank you, Chairman. It's just a query, really, where we've had Safer Street 1, and obviously we've had bicycle property marking in the register. Have we seen a reduction in bike thefts because of that?
I think, Councillor White, it's probably too early to say as yet. Yeah. A lot of that work, we did some work fairly early in the project on bike locks and bike marking, but then since we've had most of the lockdown, that's been really challenging. So some of the GPS work and some of the additional marking and locks has really only happened through the last few weeks of March. So I think it's probably a little early to reflect fully on the bike thefts. The secure bike locks, the secure bike furniture that we've put in some sites across the area this week have only just got in as well. So I think we'll be looking at that in probably the first quarter of the new year, of this new financial year, in terms of being able to assess how it compares with 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ronnie. No further hands or questions, I don't think. So just before we go to the vote, congrats again, Alan, if you can convey that to the team and indeed the partnership. Tell Heather I miss her dearly. I've not seen her in a long time. She's got my number. Yeah, great work. And it's good that we're coming together in that way. That is proving the effectiveness of investing in community safety. We're both coming to the same table. Good stuff. So really well done. Thank you. Proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Wendels. Does anybody wish to vote against? Then it is unanimous again. Mr. Batty, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
On then to the next item, agenda item 9, which I think is page 22 of the agenda, and this is Hortonville Community Centre long-term lease, Reach Learning Disability. I am delighted to welcome back Mr. Hardy. Are you well, sir?
Fine, thank you very much, Chairman. Getting there. Thank you. Yes, so thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. This report is brought to Policy and Finance as part of its journey through the various systems and committee decision-making processes, because we are at a point now where members will be aware that Reach have occupied Hortonville Community Centre following an approval to enter into a short-term lease through the District Council for 3 years now, and in that time have made some significant strides forward. In terms of the current overview, just to give a bit of a context to where we're at with this, Reach currently operate their adult learning disability service from the Hortonville Community Centre, and they operate on a footprint of ground floor generally, with upstairs offices on a Monday to Friday basis from 8 o'clock through till 5 o'clock typically, with service engagement with clients between the times that have been listed in the report. Equally, Friday night is used as a social evening for users of the service, and it's well supported by users, which again indicates a very strong relationship between service users and the centre and the staff, and a number of staff actually go to the social evenings as volunteers to make it a good evening for the service users. In terms of the operation, part of this deal currently exists with a community use of the main hall and the main foyer area and one of the meeting rooms on the ground floor. And as part of the current arrangement, Reach manage that for the District Council. They cover all the operational costs, taking the bookings, making sure invoices are paid, ensuring that the centre is opened and closed and cleaned, which has taken a responsibility away from the District Council, which is something that we were ordinarily covering off during the period between the leaving of the previous occupant and Reach's occupation from 2018. I think in terms of the short-term lease, it's worth noting that the council's decision was based on 3 different aspects. One, the short-term tenancy provided Reach with an improved base to run its services for its client users. It also meant that there was a better utilisation of a community resource, and that's proven to be the case over the last 3 years of the tenancy. And it also gave both Reach and the council an opportunity to take stock of that relationship in the short term to determine whether or not there was a longer term relationship that could be developed on that basis. And what's dropped out of that, of course, is now Reach's desire to enter into a longer term lease with the district council over a 15-year period with associated 5-year break clauses. In terms of context around impact and benefit to the council, during the period between the tenancies, the responsibility of managing the centre came back to the district council, so officers were involved. Since Reach's tenancy has started, the pressures on council staffing as a resource has reduced significantly. And the table at 3.6 gives an indication of the savings that the council's made, sort of direct savings around costs which it was responsible for during that period of 2 years around repairs, electricity, gas, sewage and water. So in 16-17, the council's direct cost savings were £6,400, give or take. In 17-18, that rose to £11,400, and the uplift in that was to do with repairs and improvements to the centre, which were necessary to keep it compliant with regulatory frameworks. So the proposal that's presented to Policy and Finance Committee is that a non-commercial long-term lease be granted to Reach Learning Disability for 15 years with associated break clauses. In terms of the financial implications, they're highlighted in section 7. The proposal does deliver benefits to the council in terms of community plan objectives around the creating vibrant and self-sufficient local communities and improving health and well-being of local residents. The report was presented to Leisure and Environment Committee on the 16th of March and was well received and supported by Leisure and Environment, and therefore is now presented to Policy and Finance with the following 3 recommendations: that a 15-year lease be considered and granted, that the Director of Housing, Health and Wellbeing be given delegated authority to negotiate the specific terms of the agreement, including community access and use as is currently the situation, and that officers work with Reach Learning Disability to explore opportunities to secure capital investment. And that was added by, I think, Leisure and Environment. They felt that that was an important element of the project moving forward, that the district council works with Reach as a partner to explore those opportunities and secure investment in a community asset that will benefit not just Reach service users but the wider community. Thank you, Chairman. I can take any questions.
Thanks, Andy. Straight into those then. Councillor Jackson. You're on mute again, Roger.
I've switched my hand off before I put the microphone on. Sorry. Yeah, I know I support the report, Chairman. As I say, Hortonville Community Centre has been an issue for many years. I mean, when it was built, it was a prize-winning, got a prize for design. But the actual design was not very brilliant at all for practicality of use and repairs and renewals and things like that. It's actually been very awkward, and over the years it was subject to a lot of vandalism, a lot of damage, and it did cost the council a lot of money to run it. We tried to dispose of it but couldn't do. And since Reach had come along, I think it's the first time for many years that the actual Hortonville Community Centre has actually done what it says on the tin. It provides something for the community, because Reach have put the foundation in there, and now the community is benefiting from it with other community outreach clubs and that are using it now. And I think people are respecting it. I think there's less vandalism going on. People appreciate what's happening there, and I do support this. I think Reach have given us a good foundation. I think Hortonville now have got a community centre to be proud of that they can use, for various other means, as well as what Reach do in a partnership with Reach. So I think I do support this and going forward, Chairman. And it's just a shame that the actual hall itself wasn't better designed than what it is, but still. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Councillor Girling.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I mean, I've spent many a night at Hornville Community Centre Stuart Wallace and Rita Crow going over accounts and figures and trying to make it a viable community centre, which was nigh on impossible at the time. And it is really good to see that Reach have grasped it and actually using it for what it was actually intended. So I'm really pleased to see that, and it is becoming a really well-respected community asset. I've just got a question though, in terms of the financial implications. In 7.1, it says about what we've got in the funds for repairs and renewals, and then it says there's an annual provision each year through the revenue budget. I'd like to know what that is, how much that is that we're putting in from the district council. And then the other part of the report where you said about the fact that Reach want to use it to be able to bring in a revenue for other things to bring in a revenue, which I fully support. But then on to 7.2, it says about the fact that any split in surplus will go, any surplus will be split between us and Reach. And I just wondered, would that include this additional funding that they'd expect to get by using the facilities better and more appropriately? And if so, how would you see that working? Would we want to put that into the renewal and repairs thing to take it away from a strain on the council?
Are you happy for me to take that, Chairman? Thank you, Councillor Girling. Yeah, in terms of the questions, the first question was relating to the repairs fund and the contribution that is made each year. That's a contribution that's in the revenue fund. It's a contribution towards future improvements of council assets, and it is currently I think just under £11,000, and it's money that goes into our forward plan for planned maintenance. So that is one of the costs that is retained on neighbourhood centres. In terms of surpluses, you're quite right, Councillor Girling. The request was that when the initial short-term lease was agreed, that it was an unknown as to how successful the community use of the centre would be, in addition to Reach's service provision. And therefore it was entirely appropriate to introduce a profit share, not a profit, that's not the right term, a surplus share potentially of any income generated over and above the operating costs. As is included in the appendix, Reach have set out a very clear statement that the cost of providing the service, the centre to community is far greater than the income earning potential from said user groups. And there are a number of reasons for that. One has already been alluded to by Councillor Jackson in the design of the building. It's a big building that comes with some operating costs, of course. Secondly, and as you've already alluded to yourself, Councillor Girling, it services an area that is obviously has some challenges, and there's a price point in terms of what the centre could charge to actually make it accessible to people coming through. So those charges are very competitive. I'd almost go as far as saying they are low by comparison perhaps with other similar facilities. And that of course puts a pressure on the income stream. So in the round, I think Reach are recognising that the use of the facilities for community groups is never going to turn significant amount of money, but they're happy to cover that off as part of their contribution back to the council for the privilege of being able to operate out of the centre. Thank you.
Can I come back, David? Can I come back? I will come back because he's not told me I can't.
Well, I was nodding. Yes.
All right, I can't. All I can see is Andy. Sorry, David. That's all I can see. Yeah. So, well, my only point then is do we intend to keep that as a thing in there that there's a profit split, or what's the point in having it if they're never going to have that anyway?
Yeah, again, through the chair, if I may, it's there because if that situation ever arose, it would it would set out that share of surpluses. I would be happy for it to be removed from the new agreement if that's what members felt was appropriate. But obviously, given the situation and given the likelihood of it being triggered, Reach have got no issues with it being in the proposed agreement as well. Thank you, Chairman.
I think we rather preempted that one. Familiar with those. Okay, any further questions at all for Andy? All right, sorry, Councillor Girling, I wasn't aware you couldn't see bits and bobs. So let me communicate back as well. When you wave, I do catch you. Right, okay. I would propose that. I think Councillor Jackson seconded it.
Yes, seconded, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any members of the committee against the recommendations that appear at section 10 on page 24? Also unanimous. Well done, Mr. Hardy. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, Andy. Take care.
Right. Sorry, just catching up my agenda. On to the next item then. Agenda item 10, page 29, that being places to ride application funding. And for this, I think we're joined by Mr. Huthwaite.
David, it's
Mr. Lamb.
It is. It's Matt Lamb today. Now, unfortunately, Richard couldn't join us this evening. So the first thing I need to do is thank him because he's done all the heavy lifting on this. You're aware that there's an exempt element to this report. So for the benefit of members of the public, I'm just going to run through what the scheme is, and then we can deal with the matters through the exempt item elsewhere on the agenda. So this is a scheme that members will be aware that's been developed through the Economic Development Committee, and it's been developed in partnership with the Harworth Group for a facility at what is now known as Thoresby Vale, which most of you will recall was the former Thoresby Colliery site in Edwinstowe. This is a submission that's been made to and in consultation with Sport England and British Cycling, and it's referred to places to ride, but the detail perhaps is more interesting than the title. So what the scheme effectively is for to enhance introduction to cycling. So it will be family recreation, cycling, walking, running trails, a cycling hub, which will comprise bike hire, a cafe, and that cafe will overlook what's referred to as a learn to ride area, which for most of us is for introductory riding and balance bike riding for children in the area. There will also be particular mini road layouts to test different types of cycling ability and activity. That will include things like a pump track, skill zones, and some green trails. I won't pretend to know all of those in terms of cycling, but you will see from the previous appendix papers what that will look like. And it's important to note there that even though this is a submission of £150,000, it's actually part of a wider 1.3 million scheme for the area. And it very much is focused on not only the geographical spread of facilities like this, and that's both nationally, regionally and locally, but equally being able to target particular groups. So women, girls, young people, those with a disability are all part of what is trying to be achieved. Also linking into having a wider legacy in terms of those that hopefully get the bug, continue cycling, and perhaps move on to the wider trails that we know are in the area and beyond. There is also links in with some of the wider recreational work, so the aspirations for a zip wire as part of the old workshop and linking into the open space around there, and also tying in with the new 5G innovation hubs that will actually link both at this site and at Forest Corner near the RSPB site. The fact that there is an item on the agenda means that sadly I'm embargoed in public in talking about the success of that bid. but hopefully for the benefit of the members of the public and the community, the fact that there is an exempt item means that constructive discussions and dialogue is ongoing to such a degree that we hope to be able to turn forward a public-facing announcement in the coming weeks. Hope that's useful for now, Chairman.
Thanks, Matt. Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. And can I just start by saying big thanks to Richard Uthwaite in his absence. I'm led to believe he's done the lion's share of the work and obviously successful on this occasion. And I'm very pleased, of course, it sits within my constituency, and it's something that young people in Edwinstowe in particular have been calling for some time. I'm equally pleased to hear the term pump track, and again, equally not quite sure what it is yet, but I've seen some pictures of them. But I'm led to believe that young people really enjoy them. And actually, some of the pump tracks are used for increasing confidence for young riders in a safer kind of environment than riding through trails, etc. I'm also pleased because where this facility is going is in the middle of a tourist area, and I'd like to see it as a start of linking up some of those places around Sherwood Forest, in particular Rufford and Rufford Abbey, but also things like Sherwood Pines and Vicar Water Country Park. I think it'd be really useful if we can link up safe cycling paths across all those visitor kind of areas. It will increase tourism. I'm speaking to several people who visit the village on cycles or with bicycles. They tell me that it's a great area for family cycling because when you come from Yorkshire, some of the cycling routes you can't take your children because they're not strong enough. But in and around Sherwood Forest, it's not too hilly. It's perfect. It's safe for family kind of cycling activities. So it's much welcomed and many thanks.
Thank you, Paul. No further hands, I don't think. I think I'm right in saying, Paul, there's a young lad in your patch or thereabouts that has been campaigning online for this sort of thing. I'm sure I've seen it somewhere.
Yeah, I think the whole proposal is a bit more than what you know, because I think it's a big thing. But there's a group of people who again they do use the bridle ways, etc. around the village. But they've been campaigning for a pump track. Again, a pump track looks like a concrete track with up and downs and around the corners on, but it may well be something different to that. But I'm sure it's great fun, and listen, I hope I'll be able to enjoy it as well.
Well, that would be very entertaining to note. I myself had to research what a pump track was, and it looked like the roads in the county about 10 years ago. Right. That is put forward. My point there, Paul, was hopefully that public group are pleased, and when it comes, they might join us at the opening of it. Anything further you want to come back on, Matt? I think in particular linking up different cycle routes is something that's already in mind.
Yeah, if I may, Chair. So again, Councillor Peacock's aware of some of the activity around this, but there are a number of partners in the area, both at a regional and local level, including Thoresby, Harworth, Welbeck and the wider landowners. And there very much is a wider aspiration for this. So I've not mentioned some of the nuts and bolts element, which are equally as important, which is signage and wayfinding. So that it will also be part of a wider package of measures, and indeed a wider aspiration to continue to draw in grant and funding support as these schemes move forward.
Excellent, thank you. So almost sounds like something that could be hub and spoke, which of course would be really good. Okay, right. The sorry, had to be done. The recommendation is there at item 7 on page 30. I'll propose from the chair, and Councillor Jackson, I think it went through your.
No, it's my committee. I
do apologise, Keith.
Thank you, Chair. I can't believe Councillor Peacock doesn't know what a pump track is, obviously, but Pleasure, absolute pleasure. I don't have to explain it to him because I don't know myself, but I have pleasure in seconding the recommendation.
I have visions of you both at the opening now, which would simply make it an athletics track. Right, it has been proposed and seconded. Is anybody against those recommendations? No, excellent. That's also unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, Matt. Although I think you're about to re-emerge with your actual hat on for agenda item 11, new funding opportunities, page 31. Am I right, Matt?
I am. Thank you, Chairman. I'm getting a few signs for connectivity, so please do stop me if for whatever reason you can't hear me, or indeed rejoice that you can't. So what I thought I'd do here is just pause, if I may, to set some context here. So I'm going to talk about the new funding opportunities that have come about through the Chancellor's announcement. So I'm sure you picked up that the Towns Fund was part of that announcement, and that got some of the headlines for obvious reasons. But there were a number of funding streams that also came forward and were referred to as part of that, some of which will be a precursor to the UK Prosperity Fund, which launches in 2023. But probably if I just float the why question again, and some of the data sets that we've recently received make for some very stark reading in terms of the challenges of some of our communities and what they're going through. So 16.5% of our workforce are furloughed or are receiving self-employment claims. Across Nottinghamshire, that figure is 15.2%, so we're higher there. Unemployment claims from last March are up by 97%. So that's 3,300 people claiming unemployment across the district. So very significant in terms of the impacts of COVID. Business closures have been an issue. So 839 up, which is a 59% increase across the piece. That again is more than the Nottinghamshire average. And business startups as well. Even though they are up, they are not up as significantly as elsewhere across the patch. So I just set that context really to be able to understand what those funding opportunities are. In terms of those funding opportunities then, I'm afraid there's some new acronyms for us all to be aware of. So there is the Community Renewal Fund, or the CRUF, the Levelling Up Fund, or the LUF, and the Community Ownership Fund, which is the COF. I'm afraid I didn't come up with those, but that is increasingly what they're being referred to by those in the industry and indeed those in government. If I take the first one, the Community Renewal Fund, so that will be a largely revenue pot, and when that says largely, the prospectus refers to 90%, and there is an ability for any organisation or provider to bid into this process for up to a £3 million package that must be spent by the end of next March. So it's largely focused on business, skills, help to work, and some cultural elements, which you'll have seen, I'm sure, from the link in the main agenda. What that fund does is a couple of things. So firstly, it offers priorities in terms of ranking places based on a set of indices. So that does not mean that lower priority places cannot apply, or indeed will not be successful, depending on the strength of the bid and the overall take-up that's presented. But in terms of priority one areas, there are 3 within Nottinghamshire: ourselves, Mansfield and Bassetlaw. And it won't surprise you to know, therefore, that we've been working with colleagues from those authorities to be able to ensure how we can work collectively together to maximise the opportunities for each of the areas to be able to progress with a bid. The other thing that the fund does is makes clear that the county council will be the arbiters of this process, and it is they that would submit the final submissions to government. So what the county have been working on, and they have been working closely with us, so with ourselves, Mansfield and Bassetlaw, is to effectively set some criteria to manage the applications coming in. So I mentioned already that if you're an education provider, if you're a skills provider, FE, the Chamber, there are a number of partners that could submit bids in their own right as part of this process. that county would then have to sift and assess. So we've been working with them to feed in and try and influence what that might look like in terms of any published criteria. In terms of the package of measures, the government's expectation is that whilst there's a 3 million overall submission level, that will include within it very significant programmes, likely over 500,000 per programme within the overall package of development. So Neil Cattell, who's on the call and will be dealing with an item later on the agenda on the exempt item, has been working hard with Economic Growth colleagues to be able to develop that. You'll have picked up from the agenda papers that the deadline for this is tight, so that the deadline is the 18th of June, and that doesn't have regard to whatever the county council deadline will be, given that they have to then sift, assess and submit these proposals as part of it. Notwithstanding all of that, this is an important opportunity, and actually some of this could be part of an evidence-based work for said UK Prosperity Fund. So the recommendation is that we do work with partners to submit a bid, and that we ensure that we pull that package together and work with members over that period. In terms of the Levelling Up Fund, the process as I describe it currently, and it doesn't work exactly like this, but it's helpful for context, it almost mirrors the Towns Fund process. So in other words, what's your evidence base? What's the need for intervention? What projects do you have ready? How do they fit together? And how do the various sectors, including private, community, FE and others, feed into that? So the first round that's been announced is in requires a submission by the 18th of June also. And what the prospectus makes clear is that each authority can make one bid for the lifetime of the fund per MP constituency area. So in other words, for ourselves, there can be one bid in the lifetime of the fund for Newark and one bid in the lifetime of the fund for Sherwood. So I mentioned round one. Round one requires schemes to start spending from today, i.e. this financial year that we've just tipped into. And therefore, they have to be genuine. We use the language shovel ready, but in other words, have planning consent, be ready to go, with the only gap being funding. And my recommendation to the committee is there is only one scheme that currently fits that bill, that already has the backing as a strategic priority, both for this council and for the Towns Fund, and that would be the Newark Southern Link Road. So that would also have the backing of Homes England, Highways England, the LEP, the County Council and ourselves. And hopefully, based on a discussion yesterday, Midlands Connect. So that would be the recommendation in terms of what could meet the criteria for round one, which is live now. In terms of round two, the recommendation would be that we get that evidence-based piece of work I referred to earlier right. And you'll be aware of the process that was followed for Newark, which was very much working through data and opinion as to what are the challenges of our places, what does that look like, is that across the pit communities, does that build upon agendas already happening? So we've already referred to in the past the work regarding Ollerton High Street, the Hub, the Robin Hood line, Edwinstowe that we touched upon this evening. There are a number of areas I think that could fall into that category, but that will need a process, a governance and a bringing together of all the partners, which will run beyond just June and into the coming months and years ahead. So I should just say, in terms of the ceiling levels, if you like, of any grant submissions, so each authority can submit proposals for up to 20 million. But if you're the county council, so if you're in a tier area, the county can also submit a bid for between 20 and 50 million. And again, the recommendation is, and the suggestion to county colleagues to work with, is that there are significant transport schemes in the west of the district that could be genuinely transformational. I've already mentioned the Robin Hood line, and indeed there is also the DFT supported, so to outline business case stage, 614 corridor and Ollerton roundabout. So we need to mobilise to be able to make sure that we can maximise on the opportunity in my submission to the committee. The final fund, I don't have a great deal to say about, because you've seen the headline, more to follow. So on that basis, I will leave it there, Chairman, and happily take any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions at all for Mr. Lamb? I didn't think so. That reflects a very comprehensive presentation, Matt. I think, however, we will all note that it's excellent news that more funds will potentially come our way. And especially, similar to earlier reports, that we're clearly indicating not just a zeal to draw money into the Sherwood area, as we've been campaigning, or lobbying, probably a better word, for some time to try and get, Senior Keith, try and get money into that area, but also that we're going to ensure that we learn from more recent funding applications and apply that full effort, so we go for the maximum yield, not just a quick win. And again, much like the Towns Fund and others, seek to bring in something more transformational for some of those areas, rather than perhaps some of the historic piecemeal bits here and there that we sometimes get. Councillor Girling.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I think it's quite exciting, actually, because it's going to give us the opportunity to really look at what we can do throughout the whole of the district, particularly over in the Sherwood area as well, though. And the structure that we're going to do it in, it means we're going to be able to make sure that they're going to be really viable projects and give every possible chance of success. And it's not just for that particular project. We'll discover, no doubt, other things that can be done over there to help lift that area. So I'm quite excited about it, to be fair. And I'm a pleasure in seconding the proposal.
Thank you, Keith. If there's no questions, Matt, any closing remarks from yourself?
Just one, Chairman. I've already mentioned the deadlines that have involved in this particular case, and that will mean operating outside of the committee system most likely. So we will certainly hit ED for the next round of committees. But sadly, the first deadline falls before we next meet as a committee. So I'll be keeping members informed, but that will be outside of the agenda, and that will include any potential financial support asks, notwithstanding we're not there yet in terms of the discussions and the capacity funding with government.
Thanks, Matt. Just for absolute clarity on that, and obviously we can't do anything. The deadlines, they are what they are, and the meetings are already scheduled. So it's good that we will have an opportunity to state stuff through economic development. And I know we've flagged with a number of councillors to keep an eye out for that. It is the forum, and all members can attend, and I'm sure the chairman will permit them to speak if they so wished. Thereafter, my understanding is, and I'm not challenging or testing this, just want to clarify before we sign off the recommendation, that anything further might require an urgent decision from Policy and Finance, or do you require delegated authority having consulted economic development?
Chairman, we can do it through the urgency item route you described, with me keeping members informed offline.
Thank you, Matt. Just wanted to check that. Okay, so the recommendation then appearing at section 6 on page 33, proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Girling. Anybody disagreeing? Okay, also unanimous. Thank you, Matt. Right. So then, am I on to item 12? Yes, I am. Sorry, I'm having to look at 3 devices here. So that is a minute of a decision. I'll just return to the full agenda so I can do these properly. There we go. Right, for information then, so we've received that from Matt. You've had the urgency item on Newark Towns Fund. Anything further on that at all? No. Also, the additional street scene staffing requirement. Excellent decision taken there, increasing our staffing, but there is an income yield as we're gradually increasing contracts with parishes, which actually should be a double win, because we might see an increased uniformity of standards and provision. Right, then we are on to finance items for information. So again, the urgency item, and a lot of these, just for clarity, if anybody's looking in, are because of timescales on grant applications and others. So the 2021 RAP Binfrastructure grant, cracking title, but well done everybody for being successful in that. So that should mean we can increase the provision of bins, particularly on sort of A roads and lay-by areas where we know we have issues. It might not combat fly tipping, but it hopefully will combat some of the lower level issues of litter that we experience in those areas, dependent on the behaviours of certain members of the public. All right on that one. Then the urgency item for the EV, electric vehicle charge points capital budget. Again, further demonstration of progress on that agenda. Right, okay then. So just before we move through to the confidential and exempt items, I'm hoping Suzanne Sheed is with us. I just want to ask on item 19, Southwell Leisure Centre. Not going to challenge the reasons for confidentiality. I think they're understood, but time has moved on. Just going to ask Suzanne, does it still need to remain confidential?
I'm happy to take it as open as whatever we discuss tonight will be released tomorrow anyway. So in terms of timing, I don't think there's any benefit for keeping it exempt.
In that case, stay where you are. We'll go straight on to that item if everybody's content.
Totally agreed, Chairman. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, sprung that one on you, Suzanne. I hope you're ready to go.
Of course I'm ready.
You're live on air now, Suzanne, you see.
Okay, let's go for it then. So this report updates the committee on the progress around the future management of Southwell Leisure Centre, and to advise that Leisure and Environment Committee has approved proceeding with the lease on the basis of the heads of terms, subject to approval by this committee of the financial framework required. So the council and trustees have agreed the heads of terms, and Active for Today board met and also approving principle taken on the management of Southwell Leisure Centre alongside their existing remit on behalf of the council. Section 2.6 of the report sets out the maintenance costs that's predicted over the lease period of 25 years. And there are a number of linked activities that are to be completed ahead of the disposal, including the signing of a deed of covenant across the adjacent 6 landholders, which is in hand, but that's just something else that needs to be completed. The recommendations approved by Leisure and Environment are set out in section 3.1. And in terms of financial implications, a couple of things to just bring to your attention is that the 1.5 million remains in the capital programme relating to any expansion project, but just to note that the contribution from Southwell Leisure Centre Trust due to the pandemic has now depleted. So any future project to extend would be outside of this arrangement and would be subject to a separate business case and due diligence. As far as the repairs and maintenance requirements over the 25 years, the cost to the council is just shy of £4 million, so 3.98 million, with the rest of the cost being passed to Active for Today for the works that they undertake. Also, there is £77,525 worth of works that's identified as being required from the fire risk assessment that was done as part of the conditions survey. And that is part of the recommendations to make provision for that within the budget for this year. Active for Today are also asking for the losses to be underwritten that relate to coming out of the pandemic for the next 24 months. And it's proposed that some of the savings that Active for Today will be making through their restructure can be used to help to offset the initial losses that may arise from bringing Southwell Leisure Centre Trust into their remit. There is also a £5,000 budget for incidentals arising from trustees that until we actually see, we don't know, but to put a little provision in there should anything arise. There are some pension liabilities that they're currently being explored, and once that information is available, that will come back to members to make a decision on that. So the recommendations are set out in section 8, the last page of your agenda, page 59, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'm going to go straight to Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. I will second this report. Well, I can oppose this report if I may, because I think Suzanne has done a wonderful, wonderful job in presenting and getting all this work done and getting where we are today. She's going to have big payback time with Matt Finch in the future, I think, for dropping this one on her. But no, Suzanne, well done. I think this is a really good step forward and secures positive leisure provision, the Southwell, the people of Southwell and the surrounding area, you know, bringing it back onto the Active for Today and our remit. It was just disappointing that some of the Liberal Democratic members in Southwell were against it, whereas we have been forcefully trying to provide and secure this leisure facility and its future. The hard times with the COVID and the crisis all leisure centres have been very, very difficult, and this was the only way forward. And I'm really pleased that our group has supported this in providing a first-class leisure facility in Southwell, run by Active for Today, and with our support. So thank you, well done, Suzanne, and thank you for our group for supporting this.
Thanks, Roger. Are there any further questions or comments from committee? Okay, so just to echo that, Suzanne, huge thanks, and indeed to others involved, the trust and all those. This does secure provision in Southwell, but also brings it into that family of Active for Today and other things we're doing, and proves we invest in leisure across the district. So an excellent outcome. And Roger, I know you've been part of the negotiations, so thanks to yourself, Councillor Blaney, Rainbow and others who have been involved. Brilliant stuff. Suzanne, you can finish earlier now, so double win for you. By way of reward, you get an extra 10 minutes of your life back.
Thank you. And tomorrow off, I presume.
And well, I'll get back to you. So, proposed by Councillor Jackson. I'm happy to second that. Is there anybody against the recommendation? Then that is passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Right, bear with. I've obviously varied the agenda there, so just need to reacquaint myself as to where I was. Right. Okay, the other issues do need to be taken in confidential session. Those being the exempt agenda that we had with regard to places to ride, but also the discussion on the Stodman Street delivery vehicle, which is regard to what is probably known colloquially as the former Marks and Spencers. And obviously that involves contractual and financial items that cannot be disclosed at this time. Therefore, I am required to ask that you consider resolving that under Section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. So moved, seconded by Councillor Girling. Thank you. Anybody against? Then we will pause for a moment until we've had confirmation.